Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Projector Stories podcast. My name is Sarah. I'm a 1-3 emotional projector.
Hi, I'm Laura. I'm a 5-1 splenic projector.
And this is, I believe, is this our fourth episode or is this our third?
I
Fourth.
think it's 4. I think we're at
Wow,
4.
okay. Time flies when you're having fun. Um, and yeah, we're basically, just to give everyone a synopsis, just talking about whatever has been going on with us. Occasionally we'll touch on collective transits and things of that nature, but generally speaking, it's just our life stories in deconditioning and being projectors and all of the nuances that come along with it. So, is there anything you'd like to add in the beginning, Laura, before I move forward?
No, we're okay here.
Okay, perfect. So there's a couple things that I want to talk about this round. But I think, I guess I want to ask you first, has there been anything this past week that's happened that feels notable, especially from like being a projector attempting to decondition perspective?
Well, as you know from our side conversations, I loathe this 39:55 transit of the new year. I didn't realize how much I hated it until it happens. But this year is different because we have Saturn in 55. So like the whole channel is defined. It's not just the sun in 39 and 38. But yeah, I can talk about this transit. It is a Moody transit. It's like a channel of a Moody person. I can't remember the exact title or keynote of it, but it's individual circuitry and it's from the root to the emotional center. So it's the pressure to emote, the pressure to have feelings, the pressure to want to have some sort of emotional mutation happen inside of us. And it is gosh darn unpleasant, especially with the provocation energy of 39. Unpleasant for me since I'm not an emotionally defined person. But I'm noticing with this transit that I'm just very moody and I don't want to deal with people. And it's interesting if you look at the body graph because this transit goes up towards the 2212, towards the throat. And 2212 is the channel of openness. It's the channel of a social being, like wanting to tell someone else about your feelings, wanting to make the bridge from like that individual energy to involving someone else in it, because individual is all about me, myself, and I. And last week I talked about how sometimes there's nothing to say. Like sometimes people can just keep their potholes closed or whatever it is, their mouth holes closed. There's nothing that needs to be said, and let's just embrace silence. And so now with this week's transit and all this emotional energy, I kind of just want to deal with me, myself, and I. And yet other people are wanting to get up and like share each other's business. And I'm not feeling it. And invitations have arisen. And it's just like the age-old question in the human design community of like, what happens when you have a transit? Does it affect your definition? Should you use the emotional energy that's defined if you're not emotionally defined? And the answer is always just like keep to your own authority. Your body will be consistent and there's nothing that you need to do otherwise other than listen to your own authority. But it's gosh darn hard when that emotional energy is so very loud and distorting and can override one's authority with the intensity of it in the present moment. So I've been receiving invitations that my moodiness has not wanted to say yes to, in terms of like helping family members with certain tasks that have not been interesting to me. And just like the constant pressure of just like, help me do this thing, help me do this thing, help me do this thing. And I don't want to say not being able to say no, but not being able to like find isolation where I can create boundaries to say no, because someone's gonna keep knocking on my door with my fifth line. Like, just leave me alone with my fifth line. Hermitness. It's not even a hermit. It's just like I just don't want the spotlight on me. And it's just been a week of like needing to be there for others. It's exhausting. How about you, Sarah?
Hard life having that transpersonal karma. It was funny too because I got a reading last week from a lock, and he said that, typically 1-3 profiles, which is my profile, do not need other people. Like if you're a generator or if you're a manifestor and you have a 1-3, like you really can be self-sufficient. But because I'm a projector and my life is about the guiding the other, it's like I get sucked into transpersonal karma, even though I I want to just be like self-obsessed. It's like there's this self-obsession, but it like the quality of it like has to do with the other. But insofar as the 3955, I mean, it's interesting because I felt, and Laura, do you know what day this transit started?
I don't know. I think 28th, 29th. I don't know. No,
Okay.
we're on, I think, line 4 today. I think there's still 5 and 6 tomorrow and the next day. Today, as we're recording, it's a Wednesday. So I don't know what day it actually
Well,
started.
it definitely started like the 31st, it was in action. So
Yeah.
like, but like I felt that like for me, what it feels like, because I have emotional definition, was like this weightiness. Like almost like I was kind of stuck within this weightiness, and like I couldn't really move, like I couldn't move really that quickly or past it. So I was like
Like
stuck in.
that's the great way to explain individual circuitry because it's waiting for the pulse. Nothing's happening, nothing's happening, nothing's happening, and it's waiting for the light switch to flip. And you can't force it if there's like no actual mechanical mutation happening or chemical mutation happening. So
Yeah.
yeah, the weight of waiting for something to happen. Yes.
No wonder why y'all with the 3955 are moody, because it's like it, because that is how it's felt. And like I don't know what the channels that were defined prior to, well, I know the 58 was defined, which was, getting up in my business in a sense, since I have multiple planets on the design side in the 58. But um yeah, it was like I felt as though there was a free flow of things coming out of me, and then this transit happened and I was kind of like, meh, what's the point of anything? Like what's the point? What's the point? Even though I'm super interested in human design and like want to do all of these, talk about it all the time, do all of these things, it's like my excitement for the information just kind of waned. And that's to be, you can only, even as a right-minded person, you can only absorb so much information at a given time. And it was funny because I was like talking to Steffi. I was like, I'm almost done with year one of I'm almost done with year one of rave psychology. She's like, in 2 weeks. I was like, yes. Yes, indeed. But I mean, I think because I have emotional definition, it hasn't been loud in my face. It's just been kind of like this alternative, like emotional moodiness, like just kind of not feeling a little stuck, to be honest. So yeah, it probably would be different for somebody who has an undefined emotional center, just generally speaking. And that transit will be over in a couple days because the 39 will be gone and we'll be on to something new. Do you want to say anything else about the 3955?
Not about that, but well, that the day the transit began, I woke up feeling moody. Like I was just like immediately moody. And I was wondering, like, oh, I wonder if there's an emotional transit. And then later in the day I looked and I was like, oh well, no shit. It's the moody transit. No wonder I feel like this. But going back to what you were saying with like being in the rabbit hole and like feeling like there's now a little bit of a lull, I can relate to that because I've been in a very long lull of like several months, or just like the insane consumption that happens in a very short amount of time. That's how I was with rave cosmology. I
Yeah.
just inhaled it all, and then I needed like a really long time to process. And so recently, it's fun because I listened to part of rave psychology, and then I stopped because I guess the interest dissipated. But it's fun to see Sarah's excitement of like jumping down rabbit holes because for the past few months, like I have not been consuming any human design content. I've just been applying what I know so far and my opinions so far to the world around me, which is romance novels, which is not necessarily real life, but it's fun to still apply theories and to imagine the body graphs of fictitious characters, and to apply the knowledge in that way. But yeah, I've not been in the rabbit hole consumption mode. So, but you can't really like force it. It's just
You
like
cannot.
whenever it takes you, you zoom and you go, and then it stops, and you're like, okay,
Well,
until
yeah,
next time.
Yeah, you're just like, you like just unhook your jaw and you just like open up your mouth and you just like literally
Yeah.
consume like an insane, like a boa constrictor, like eating a small animal. You're just like taking all of this in, and then however long it takes to digest, it takes. But yeah, I mean, I could never force it because I'll literally, and this is one of the maybe, most interesting things that I've found about me is like I'll go through these periods of time where I am obsessed with music and all I'm doing is listening to music wherever I'm going, wherever I'm walking, music, 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 music. And then it's like I'll turn that spigot off and then turn on the spigot for needing to learn. And then it's like nonstop, whether it's podcasts or YouTubes or books or all of the audios from human design or courses, whatever it is, like all of my audio like capacity um goes towards that instead of music. And I completely like turn off the spigot for music. So it's like I don't even want to go there. I don't even want to get like emotional. Like I'm not even like I can't even play in that river. I just need to stay in my, I guess, my mental life. So I've seen myself go periodically, which of course makes sense because um my my body is periodic um as far as the way that my brain works, my active brain. And so there's like this periodic quality where like certain things will be periodically turned on and certain things will be periodically turned off. Um, so yeah, so I don't know if there was anything that happened human design ish, other than the fact that I'm just like consuming vast quantities of information. Was there anything else that happened to you this week, Laura?
I managed to take care of one piece of Muggle business, which was responding to my jury duty summons and requesting a different courthouse. However, they just postponed it and put me back in the same courthouse. So I think when the next day comes, several months later, I'm just gonna have to do the same thing and be like, nope, this is not what I want. Like, I cannot get to this courthouse. Please change the location again. Just because I don't drive. Like, it's extremely inconvenient to spend 2 hours plus taking public transit to get to some place at the crack of dawn when you're a projector. Like, no, thank you. Um, but yeah, other than that, no. Just trying to muggle through everyday activities.
Muggle through, just muggling through. I get it. I know I have like a few things on the docket that I need to do, and it's like just if I don't have the energy for it, it's not going to happen. And then shockingly, I get the energy for it, and bada boom, bada bam. We're doing new things. Oh, there is one thing that's happening, and that is I'm changing rooms at my aunt and uncle's house where I'm staying at because I think that the other room is more cave friendly.
Ooh.
So I'm interested in seeing how that works because I turned on, I guess you could say, my PHS insofar as the fact that I'm calm determination, and I've been doing that, and my stomach has been seriously just my stomach has just it's been night and day. It's like almost like, did I ever have stomach problems, or was I just not eating correctly for my design? And so now I'm just kind of like, well, I want to go into this other room because the caveness is more cavey. It's like there's more of a secure, it feels a little bit more secure to me. Also, the lighting is better. So more to come on that because this time next week I will have moved into it and I'll be in a different room and we'll see if my brain functions better while I'm there versus being in where I am now. So that, and then the other thing is that I have been kind of deep diving into personality variables, specifically the personality mind. What is that called? Motivation, right? Variables, and also just, or the personality mind, just variables in general, and realizing the extent to which the right-minded folk are seriously disadvantaged and deeply conditioned in this world. Because something else that I was told during the session that I had with a lock was that if I am being strategic, which would be left-minded, then I'm in transference. And it's the only way that I can be strategic is by being in transference. I can't be strategic operating from my correct motivation. And that really hit me because I was like, oh, okay, my mom was strategic, my dad was strategic minded. Um, and I've been basically conditioned since I was like a kid to be that way because we live in a strategic world. And anytime anyone asks you, hey, like, what are you doing with your life? What is your 5-year plan? Oh, like, where do you work? Like, all of the questions that people ask that relate to moving through time in a linear way towards some greater goal, it's all strategic. And so that's what we've inherited a 7-centered world as 9-centered beings. And it works for some of us who have more leftness or we are more strategically minded. But for the most part, it doesn't work for those of us that are, I mean, not even for the most part, everyone that's right-minded, strategic world does not work for. And I also was thinking about how this might be where the concept of like neurodivergence, not to say that like, everything that has to do with autism or ADHD or anything like that, like is a right phenomenon. But it just made me start thinking about how like there's all of these people who like info dump and have like hyper fixations on specific things and can like give you all this information. And I'm like, well, that's very right-minded, for people to just have these, it's very right-minded with a left variable for environment, like having these like hyper fixations that you can't talk about unless somebody pulls them out of you. Um, which I think a lot of times is like how people who are neurodivergent or on the spectrum were like thinking about the way that they info dump. Like it's very right-minded thing. But point is that I just started realizing like, holy shit, this right-minded thing is almost more important than even your profile lines. The variables are almost, if not, I think they're more important than your profile, because it's going to be the first thing that's going to tell me if I'm looking at your chart just how conditioned you are. Like how conditioned are you? If you have a right mind and you're working strategically, you are in transference, generator, manifester, whoever it is. Because while I think generators can tend to be more correct insofar as their body or their design goes, they can still be deeply in transference on their personality side. So, whereas projectors, like we just get lost for our bodies and for our personalities, but that's neither here nor there. Laura, do you have anything you want to add before I just keep on talking about this?
Not well. It's hard. You're asking me to be strategic with the response in a way.
No,
But
well,
like, do you
no,
have
no,
anything
no, no.
to
Well, I mean, is there anything that's come up for you in your capacity
Yeah,
as a
let's see.
resource?
Let's see if I can externalize it in a way that allows for the openness. Well, I just like the heaviness of what you said with like inheriting a 7-centered world is a lot. I've had thoughts about this, not that are coherent enough to share here now, but just thinking about 7, just like using our mind as an authority in general, using thought to decide what to do and how that has corrupted us to not be able to listen to our own inner authority. And just like the pressure we put on one another to try to use our brains to make decisions. Um, and this is what I wanted to think about. This is kind of tangential, but um, before the 7-centered world, we had the 5-centered world, and that was more feminine. Like that was like you live in the moment and you just receive and are existing spontaneously, as sometimes we like to say with the spleen, spontaneously, but splenically. And I was thinking about how hard it is for splitting people like me to be correct because I'm not being correct. My cousin made asked me to hang out ahead of time. It's not like, do you want to do this thing right now? Yes or no. It's, do you want to do this thing on this day? And like I feel like most people, whether you're emotional, you have to say, I can't answer you right now because I need my time. As a splitting person, you have to say, I can't answer you right now because that moment is not right now. And so I try to tell people, like, ask me tomorrow, ask me in the moment. And like, it doesn't agree with them. Like, my cousin's emotional. He wants to know ahead of time so he can plan and like come to his own clarity about things. And yeah, like, it's the jury duty. Like, I don't know if upon the day of my sevens, if I want to go or not. Not like I have a choice or anything if I'm, being a good Samaritan, which was a previous conversation we had here. But just the difficulty with being, in the moment. And I guess that's like the quote unquote beauty, if we're going to call it that, of being in a nine-centered world where we take the left and we take the right and we mix it all up together and we get the hokey pokey and we turn ourselves about because we're a mix. We're not just left as we were and we're not just right as we were. We are a mix of both. And in that, there's so much nuance of how we come to be and express ourselves before eventually the raves will come, and the raves will be for the most part right beings. So we're this interregnum, but yeah, not only is there extreme deficiency and difficulty in being a right-minded person as we are, but just also being true to authority in any shape, way, or form. It's just like the world does not support it. The world does not support human design, and so it's a struggle. Yeah, that's what wanted to come out of me.
Yeah, well, no, and it's funny because I just had this like whole conversation with Steffi. Hey, Steffi, if you're listening,
Hi,
about
Steffi.
hi. We were talking because for work, it's like what we're trying to do in 2024 is allow ourselves to be the resource that we are without having to try and work in the strategic. And it's like, oh, you have a business and you're not going to be strategic. How is that going to work for you? You know what I mean?
Or like
And
you guys having this plan for 2024 is in and of itself being strategic.
well, and it's like the real plan, if you want to get specific, it's not really a plan, it's just living correctly as ourselves. And like just being able to be correct within ourselves without the business completely evaporating, right? So it's like, in a sense, you can't avoid strategy. You can't avoid it. And when you're I mean, you could if you want to just go live in the mountains somewhere. Um, I mean, technically you could, but trying to figure out how to strategize, not being strategic.
Yeah.
It's like
Well,
as
yeah.
funny. I know it's as funny as like how I'm trying to prove that you don't need to prove yourself.
Yeah.
Like there's a lot of like these these things where we're trying to work things out. But like the bottom line that I wanted to like I was trying to make to Steffi is like, look, you're a resource. We're not trying to create these step by step by step plans. We're trying to recognize what is getting pulled out of you and for why, so that we can understand what kind of a resource you are.
But that is so you can't whittle that down. That depends on the other person.
Well, it
Every client
does.
that comes to Steffi
Well,
is going to pull something else
exactly.
out of her.
Exactly. But she does have, a focused perspective. And so it is within this realm of online business stuff. And so literally what we're going to do now is we're going to have meetings because we always have powwows just to like catch up and like talk about what's going on with work anyway, weekly, where we look at what she's done, look at what's been pulled out of her, and then we just take note of it so we can recognize where she's getting this stuff pulled out, and then we're going to create um essentially a library of resources for people to use. Now, I mean, of course there's lots of arguments to be made. This is strategic. Yes, the entire time that we've been working together we've been strategic, so we've been in transference. So it's not like we're going to be able to just like fast and hard get rid of it, but the awareness around what is correct versus what's not correct and like all of that stuff, like it's starting to burn a hole in our brain. So we know, like for me, I realize, and I knew this, like I knew this deep down, that I can't strategize things, that it just literally hurts me when I'm trying to do such things. And I've had to do them my whole life. And I thought that there was something wrong with me. And now I'm like, oh, that's just quite literally not how I work. And it's never going to be how I work. And because the schools that we go through are testing people in strategic ways, like we've been conditioned to be that way and to make ourselves feel bad if that's not the way that we learn, because we didn't realize that there was any other way. And so I guess specifically, I want to address projectors who are right-minded, because that's what I am. And that's, in the depths of my, not self, a lot of it has come from feeling like I need to be strategic in this world, which anyone who has right-mindedness can relate to. And it just made me realize, wow, all of these people in my life, you, Laura, my friend Kristen, who we work with, Steffi, like all of these people are right-minded. And actually, I think my friend Anna too. And it's like, these are the people that I really enjoy the most, because they have so much to offer. It's never you never know what you're going to get. You just don't. You're just like, it's always kind of a surprise. And the depth of what they know, people who have the focused or the left variable on their view, they can go deep into things that you're just like, for you and for Steffi, actually, because you both have it. I'm like, how the hell did you figure that out so specifically? Because it's not the way that my brain works either, because it's peripheral. So I'm picking up everything instead of going down deeply into one thing. And yeah, I mean, I think that it's just something that Ross said, is that people who are right-minded, that they're the ones whose passenger has the best chance of really not trying to run the life. Because people who are left-minded, because they're good at planning and strategy, it'll be really hard for them to let go of the passenger thinking that it's in charge, or the mind thinking that it's in charge. So yeah, I mean, the concept of being a resource and realizing that you need somebody else to pull something out of you in order to access the things that you have in there, and feeling like you can't get it out any other way most of the time, is
It's
interesting.
frustrating.
It's frustrating.
It's frustrating.
Well, and I always keep a few strategic people around me so that they can just ask me questions and I can be like, oh, okay. I mean, it's not like you have to be strategic in order to do that, but it's like it feels really refreshing internally to be able to get out some of the information that I've been hoarding unintentionally.
No, but to not have those people, to not
Yeah.
have anyone that's going to pull out the magic that is the right, it's like it's so tiring to like where's my fractal, where are the people who will help me become the person that I'm meant to be, and not being able to be that person on your own.
Yeah. Well, no, and I mean, this is where you're like, you get super numb, homogenized, deadened people, projectors. I mean, mainly too, because they don't have the sacral energy to kind of distract themselves with. So it's like, yeah, it's terrible. I mean, it truly is. It's a, I have to like pinch myself sometimes. Like, this information is so profound. Like, and it could change people's lives. And it's easy for me to just want to hide, go into my innocence transference and not be involved in anything and be like, whatever, people can figure it out on their own. But then, realizing how much this could change somebody's life who's like receptive, and you're not getting the right stuff pulled out, it's probably because you're not around the right people, or you didn't follow your strategy in getting into relationships with them in the first place. I mean, of course it goes, oops, sorry. Of course there's multiple different reasons for it, but, and it's not like, there's not, I don't want to point fingers or make anyone blame themselves, but it also reminds you how important the other person is in your life, and having the right people in your life so that they can pull some of the gold of what you've been absorbing out.
Yeah. I have a lot I want to say in response, but I feel like a lot of different unrelated points. So we'll
Well,
see
go
how this
for
goes.
it.
One is Lara Yo on Facebook. She's in charge of the Practical Human Design Facebook group, but she made a website called Human Design from the Right. Something she said is like strategy and authority is strategic. It's a strategy to follow your strategy. It's like for the left, like the left is here to like be like, okay, here's what you can focus on, here's what you can do. Here's how to be human design. Here's how to do human design. And for the right, it's just like living in the moment and seeing what happens and not trying to control the process. And it's a whole different experience for left versus right beings. That's point one, to give a little bit of credit to her and like what she's doing in the community. Another point is what you were saying about how it pulls us into transference for someone non-strategic to be strategic. It's interesting because like there's a choice that you have, that you think you have, with the whole no choiceness of to be strategic or not to be strategic. Whereas like you can't choose your profile. Like I'm a 5-1, I can't choose not to be a fifth line or a first line. It just is like there's no other side of the coin for there to be a choice to like be or not be that thing. But just looking at the complexity of rightness, in the sense that it is a descriptor for a single thing, which is the personality crystal, which has a lot of different factors that all define it. One of it is like, is it fixed to the right or to the left? What gate is it in? What line is it in? Not just the color, but like what center is it in? Is it part of one's definition? All these things. Because Sarah, you were talking about how like it hurts you to be strategic. I'm also right-minded, and yet my gate of that right mind is in the sacral center in gate 9, which is logical, focuses on details, which in and of itself seems strategic, to focus on details, to like be able to focus on the little things, the minutiae, and being able to work. Sacral center is energy. It's like having the energy to do the thing, which seems non-passive. So this whole personality crystal of mine is like multifaceted in contradictory ways, in that like, yes, I'm able to have energy that I don't consistently have when other people can bring it to the table for me, to be able to focus on the details in a way that is dependent on who is bringing me the energy and what they can pull out of me. And like you said, I'm talking very fast right now, it feels like, also with like my focused view compared to your peripheral view. Like I furthermore will focus on the details, on the specific details. And that is how my brain will work. But it is how we fulfill our purpose through this complex thing, through our personality crystal, through our incarnation cross. It's how we, live our life to the highest potential. And just going back to that point, like you can't pick your profile number, but whether you are strategic or not, that is something that I feel like we do try to finagle our way through as right people because of those world that we live in. And there's that whole point, and also the whole point of like being super triggered by people who ask you like, what's your 5-year plan? Yes, just like the triggering, gross feelings that come up from people trying to pull a strategy out of a non-strategic being. Oh gosh, like the anxiety it brings up in the body, not fun. Maybe there is another point, but it's not coming to the surface. But yeah, those are my miscellaneous thoughts that
No,
came
those
up
are
as you were
all,
talking.
yeah, those are all really good thoughts. And yeah, I mean, I wouldn't consider myself someone who is trying to finagle myself into strategy. I was straight up choosing to be strategic. It wasn't like this was like a cute little, let me wiggle my way in. Go
Well,
ahead.
let's analyze this. Like, would you say that there is a connection between that decision and you're not self-centered, or you're not
Oh,
self-gates because
for
you're a split
sure.
definition?
For sure. For sure. For sure. For sure. My open G center and my open ego, like, big time.
So it's the strategy that lives in our not self,
Yeah.
not just in not self in general, but like our own unique individual not selves.
Exactly. Exactly. And I just thought it was interesting because I had been spending so much time thinking about this concept of like, and I posted something on TikTok, but it was like talking about how your unconscious mind is actually your body. So like that's what's unconscious if we're thinking about it in a psychological perspective. And your shadow is actually your undefined centers. It's your not self. Your shadow is actually your not self. And for lack of better understanding, I think that I've been living in my whole life is my shadow has been my shadow, which is very Pluto rising of me. But for the most part, almost all of my decisions have come out of there, and I've been, I guess you could say, like self-loathing my shadow instead of like truly self-loathing myself, if that makes sense. So it's like the thing that I don't like about me that I've identified as me is actually it's my evil twin, it's my doppelganger, whatever, what have you. Um, it's not the consistent parts of me, it is my conditioning. And you're never going to get rid of your conditioning, right? But you can stop making decisions from your mind that play into it and realizing like when I start going into strategic mode, I mean, this shit happens with specifically, oh my gosh, with like relationships, my open G center, and just like things like that. When I'm like, oh, now I can finally see that's not me. Like that's not actually me. And the way that, something else interesting that Alok said was that as long as you don't follow your strategy and authority, you're going to be reliving the same old painful stories out in your life. You're going to continue to pull the past into your present. And so it's like the way to avoid the repetition compulsion, or the way to do away with the repetition compulsion that we all know and love, where you keep attracting the same person, same type of person into your life to continue like consistently. That's all the not self. And so if you're living correctly according to your strategy and authority, like you're not going to have these same consistent experiences. Which I was like, wow, that's fucking amazing. It's like really cool to think about, because my entire romantic relationship experiences have basically been the same thing. So I'm like, wow, I get to open up a new chapter insofar as that, because now it's like I'm following my strategy and authority come hell or high water. And yeah, I don't know. Is there anything that's pulling out of you?
Well, not that I have any relationship decisions that I've ever made, but the mind will fantasize and the mind will fantasize strategically. But it more in terms of G center with like direction, trying to figure out a direction. That's a very strategic thing that direction connects to. Or you can just go with the flow and see what happens. But I wonder how it is for non-strategic people who have a defined G center, how they go about being non-strategic with like that set direction that guides them along their trajectory. I don't know. Not us, not for us to worry about. Maybe it's you, maybe you audience members should worry about it or not. I don't know.
Curious.
But yeah.
Yeah, no, I mean, and it's just interesting to think about this, the things that you've been battling with your whole life are really things that, you're not like you've been conditioned into that aren't actually you, that are your not self, and that actually you don't have to deal with that stuff anymore. Like you don't actually have to continue to repeat the same old pattern over and over again. And the other thing that I was thinking about was that I think Ra said that right-minded people, they have the best, like their personalities, it's like the most natural for them to kind of be the awareness. But I've also been thinking about how, there's a lot of, I guess you could say, spiritual teachers who are like, go with the flow, like wait by the river to watch the bodies of your enemies flow by. Like basically the idea being don't be strategic, just like allow life to come to you. And it's like that's only true for 50% of people. Like 50% of
Yeah.
people are supposed to be strategic.
Well, okay, so you bring up a different point in my head. Can I go on a tangent?
Yeah, yeah.
Um, oh no, I just forgot my tangent.
No.
It's connected to that second line, hope, motivation, wait for the bodies of your enemies to go by. But oh, the last piece of my previous tangents that I wanted to share was that like you were saying about how you have all these right-minded people in your life and you're like, oh, I really like this. And it's just also going back to that thing you like, you have all these projectors in your life, really like this. And me, like, I'm surrounded by generators and I'm surrounded by lefters, like lefties. Like, I have so many strategic people around me that I don't get to experience a lot of rightness. And I feel like, again, like an isolated creature among the other bodies that I'm trying to blend in with to get by, to muggle through. Um, and it, yeah, again, going back to that loneliness, it's painful. But I've been observing, is this transference? Who knows? I have personal views, so I'm supposed to look at myself, and looking at power dynamics is not necessarily how I'm supposed to be seeing things. But I've been observing certain family members, which I've talked about again with like child rearing and this and that. Like I said before on this show, my sister is a reflector and her husband's a projector, and they're both guilt motivation people. And they're both twos. My sister's a 2-4 and her husband's a 6-2. And I was thinking about two-ness compared to their guilt motivation, because that's color five, and
Mm-hmm.
5 and 2 do this little dance of like hope versus guilt, or the heretic versus the hermit. And just thinking about that too, it receives so much crap. I'm going to call it crap from others calling it out. The two doesn't necessarily like it calls that, just like I call upon the fifth line projections that my mind doesn't necessarily think it wants to receive, but they happen. The two receives those projections, but they're different flavors of projections, because it's not like, what can you do for me? It's like, I'm going to tell you what to do for you. And in terms of that being guilt, they receive a lot of criticism on just like everything, just like people trying to give them advice that they're not asking for. But they're receiving it because of their two-ness, receiving all these projections, and it's flavored with guilt. And so I've just been thinking about how this plays into it, because going back to like previous threads we've had here, or maybe just Sarah and I have talked about it, not here, I don't know. My desire motivation is flavored with sixth tone acceptance. And that is like the other end. I think last episode we talked about how is it for sixth line people who have desire motivation. The sixth is all about the innocence, whereas 3 is the desire. My desire motivation is underneath flavored with acceptance, which is innocent to a certain degree. It's just like whatever is. So just there's nuance. My point is, what's my point? What's my mind trying to focus on here? I've been observing the dynamics of the guilt motivation playing out for people. Oh, I told Sarah, like, here's a mental note. This is what I want to talk about on our next episode. Um, I'm going to make a general umbrella statement, which is no one, which again, it's a very general no one, but no one wants advice that's unasked for. Like, no one wants unsolicited advice. And the exception to the rule is like, if you give someone an open-ended, like, whatever you want to say to me is totally okay invitation of like, I will always hear advice from you. But for the most part, like, no one wants to hear advice unless it's explicitly asked for, which is why we have projectors. It's not just from projectors, it's from like any aura type. No one wants to hear advice unless they're inviting you to share it with them. And so that creates a huge dilemma for the two, as it's being called out to constantly receive advice from people who are giving unsolicited advice. But this, yeah, I just wanted to talk about this whole like projector quality of life. It's not just for projectors, but unsolicited advice, and how I feel like I have to go back to that written note that I wrote because I don't remember what my point was with wanting to share it, but just the dilemma that happens in life when we want to give advice that's not invited, or when we receive advice that's not invited, and just like that whole theme. I don't know. Do you have anything you want to say about that, Sarah? I feel like I'm not.
No, I mean, I think that it's a good, well, I mean, I'm just thinking about the 2 and the 5, and like also The two does get a lot of shit because it's also possibility versus probability. So
Yeah.
as far as my perspective goes, I can relate because I have possibility perspective, which is related to line two. And I mean, as far as just like the invitation and things like that, this is part of the reason that generator world is so messy because they don't know that they're supposed to wait to respond, and so they're constantly initiating things with people and not realizing
But
that.
the thing is, like, for them, they don't need to be, I mean, they can be explicitly invited to share their opinion, but like you say something, and if they have a defined throat, like their response is just gonna come up and they're gonna respond with their advice. And
Yeah,
for them to be like that in the moment with a defined throat, if it's their outer authority that's being expressed, if they're, responding correctly for themselves, the energy is there to respond, then they're going to share their unsolicited advice. And yet whether it's received correctly or not is a whole other story. Again, going back to that statement that I made of like, no one wants to hear unsolicited advice. But it goes, okay, so this connects to like the whole theme of like unsolicited advice coming from Sagittarians. I feel like we're notorious for doling out advice that's not necessarily called for. But I was thinking back on like my pre-human design life. I would give out unsolicited advice. It's like mostly how my not self expressed itself. It wasn't initiating doing anything, it was initiating telling people what to do because I knew better, because I was self-righteous and thought I knew best and wasn't invited to share what my opinions were. But there were times where like the open invitation was there, where I would share unsolicited advice and it would be deeply appreciated, and I would be recognized after the fact for giving advice and telling people what to do correctly. But that open, explicit invitation wasn't there. It's not like they said, "Can you help me with this thing?" It's like they're talking about this thing, and I'm like, "Here's what you should do," which is strategic, but it's, I don't know, it's like so complex.
it really
This
is.
this question of like, how explicit does an invitation need to be for a projector, for anyone, for any response? Like if you're a generator responding, how explicit, how detailed do things need to be laid out for you to know, okay, it's correct to do or say this?
Right. Well, and I mean, this all just made me think of just like how it's like we live in the upside down. Like this isn't a joke. Like we actually are in the upside down. And it's like, the whole don't be strategic thing, which means wait for the invitation is a strategy,
Yeah.
and so, and I can't remember her exact Instagram handle, but I think it used to be Projector. It used to be HD Stories. Her name's Sarah. Anyway, she's a projector, and she was talking about how like waiting for the invitation is not like people take it too literally. And I mean, if you're talking about like the diehard human design people, they would be like, yeah, it has to be perfectly formal. And if it's not the right invitation, right? But what about the energetics of people asking, like people needing things from you that you can sense that they're wanting to pull out of you? You can feel them like energetically tugging on you to share something with them. And you have to be sensitized to this because most people wouldn't be sensitized to that kind of thing. They would just be steamrolling and just sharing their advice um, without care for the person that's going to take it. So and also just to say, this is something that Ross said, and I don't know if he's right or if he's not right, because he said that he doesn't really know how to decondition properly, but that the ideal being, like it spent the first 30 years before its Saturn return, um and basically it doesn't get into, okay, I'm not going to explain this good, damn. It's not going to get, point being, it's not going to get into its outer authority until its Chiron return. And that's crazy because, I guess the point I'm trying to make here is that most people are incorrect, and like so the dynamics on every level are incorrect, and everyone is doing the opposite of what they're supposed to be doing. So it's hard to say that if you're doing something that is correct, it's going to pull somebody else in for you. It's not going to pull somebody else into transference. Or that they'll appreciate what you're saying, but their not self will appreciate it, right? I just went into this whole thing about how like my not self is basically who I've thought I was my whole life. And so it's like there's things that my not self would appreciate that my self, my real self, doesn't have any use for. So how do we know when we're dealing with people who appreciate our advice, if they're appreciating it because they're in not self, right? Or if it's, you know, if it's the correct thing to do. I don't know if any of that made sense.
It does, but it's just like, yeah, how do you know if you're perpetuating the circus and the upside down, or if you're actually making just receiving advice that's going to lead you to correctness, or giving advice that's going to lead others to correctness? Yeah, you don't, no choice. The perfect cop out, like there's no choice. I'm just a slave to the world and moving forward and pretending that I have choices, but I really don't. And it's all just a show, and then we die.
I mean, it's yeah, I mean, I guess I don't have, there's more questions than answers. And part of the thing that I love about human design, but it's also the thing that's maddening is like, I feel as though I entered a system that I'm going to create a system for that is based on me. You know, it's like I don't feel like I came to the end of the road with human design. I think I like the human design is like the entryway into you discovering who it is that you are, because it has not been around for that long, because people are so individual, because we live in this upside down world that rewards us for being not ourselves and basically despises or tries to get rid of the authentic expression because it's not homogenized, and the homogenized world just wants to keep the program running properly. So, you know, there's a lot of things that are against us in this journey. And I guess this is also why it's good to know what your transference is as far as your personality is concerned on the motivation side, because you're going to get into relationships with people who are completely not self, or most of the time not self. And so the invitation initially may happen correctly. You follow your strategy and authority, it's correct. And then they go into transference, and then you go into transference. Or yeah, and then they, you know, and if you're not aware of it and you're not aware that, oh, wait, this means that it's time for me to back up, then what started out as something that was correct ends in just, you know, a distraction, more or less. So, and I've been thinking about that a lot too, because me and Steffi came kind of to terms with the fact that, and this kind of circles back to my original point, if you're right-minded, your motivation is constantly in transference in this left strategic world. And so me and Steffi have, and thank God I'm a 1-3, have gone in and out of correctness, me going into her going into transference, me going into transference, back into me into desire, you know, back into transference, until I realized, oh my God, that's what's happening. And that's why I have to kind of hash what it is that our relationship is, that we need to so often, because we're going back and forth because we're still transferring out of our correct motivation. So it's like figuring all of that out. Like you have to have so much patience for people's not selves, right? And you also have to be able to draw a clear line in the sand when somebody is consistently pulling you into your transference.
It makes me think about desire motivation, because desire is strategic in and of itself. So, how can we correctly express non-strategic desire, which is as followers, not as leaders, or like our trajectory through the trajectory of being from a leader, going from the strategic leader to a receptive passive follower, and being followers and not being leaders, but still being in desire. I don't know. It's complex. It's
Well, and
not simple.
this is why you should listen to the Alak thing that when I got my reading done, I shared it with Laura, and you know, she's going to listen to it at some point, maybe if she gets the energy. But um, there is the desire is what the other person that is correct for you is pulling out
Will
of
experience.
you.
Yeah, they're being motivated by desire, by you giving the correct outer advice. So
Well, no,
like
it's not.
if you're hope, that like when you're talking to someone, you make them hopeful in the
Yeah,
correct when it's correct.
but it's
Or
all, go ahead.
if you're hope and you're making them feel guilty, like they have to do something and not be, you know, hopeful, then that's transference. So it's the I feel like Kuhn expresses this very well and very often in the Human Design Projectors page group of like motivation's not for you, and like that's his motto that he keeps shouting from his rooftop for everyone to hear. That it's like my personal dilemma with like understanding motivation is that there's so many points in time in which it is said that motivation is not for you because it motivates the other person, and yet Ra has in so many places talked about himself being motivated by his desire or his own innocence. And
He was
it's
left,
not simple.
he was left.
Yeah, that's true. That's true, but he doesn't talk about himself in the sense that he puts other people in desire. He talks about him making his own life choices based on being in desire or not, or being innocent or not. So his, you know, in terms of being strategic or passive, or receptive, when he's innocent in the sense that he's receptive and passive and going with the flow, that was wrong for him because it's non-strategic, not because it's innocence, because he's not being strategic. So for him, it was correct to be strategic. Maybe. I feel like I don't want to like etch that in stone. Don't quote me on that. But the whole like pickle with it is it's talked about in contradictory ways, in
Yeah.
the sense that, you know, there are people who will say motivation is not for you and
Yeah.
hold to that. And then there's places where Ra has said otherwise. And
Yeah.
you're like, what is the answer? I
Well,
need to
no,
know.
well, and it's interesting because Alok was one of Ra's students, and the way
Students, yeah.
that he talked to me about it was that, yes, it's up to me as a receptive person basically to tap into somebody else's desires. Not that it's my job, this is happening unconsciously, and pulling it out of them. However, simultaneously, when I'm being innocent, aka I'm like the good girl who is unmotivated and just wants to be observed, like that's me in transference too. So it's like he knows that I have a right personality mind.
Does
So
Alok have a right mind? Or is he strategic?
I can't remember. I know I looked at his chart, but I can't remember. But I'll more to come. I'll tell you later, I guess. If I can find his chart. But you know, point being that there were these two aspects of it, right? It wasn't just for the other person. Like
Yeah.
ultimately, that's how I would be able to tell, you know, if another person was correct for me, is like, what am I pulling out of them? But it's also for me to see how it is that I'm living my life. Because if I'm in innocence, I'm operating strategically, right? So, like, and I think it's funny too, Laura, you have desire, motivation, and innocence too. It's like the way that you strategically operate out of innocence is like, how can I avoid doing things? Like,
Yeah. But it's like, wait for the invitation, don't do anything. And
yeah,
it's just
yeah,
like a storm of chaos.
it really,
Trying to
well,
pick it apart.
like I'm strategizing how to like not be perceived by anyone. um
Yeah.
so it's interesting, um but yeah, so I mean that was a whole lot on transference, and also just the fact that we're still learning about all of it, and like
If you can't tell.
how to be aware of it, you know, and like how to understand it. And I do feel like because it's also seeing, it's not just what you're pulling out of the other, it's like how you get around certain people. So if you're going into strategy around them, you're like, I'm transferring into my not self, basically. Um, so it's a multivalent thing, and it works differently in different situations. But um, you know, it's interesting too, because I feel like in the beginning of my relationship with some people, I do like tap into their desires and pull it out and it's correct. But then they go into transfer at some point and it's like no longer is that relationship correct, even though like it was entered into correctly, you know? So yeah, it is a continued learning situation. Oh, and a lock is based on the information that was available on the internet. He's left. He's strategic. He's
Okay, because I was wondering, because you told me that the majority of your reading about was about relationships and money. So I'm wondering, like, was
it
that
wasn't
being
about
pulled
money and
out of him?
relationships and
Huh?
sex. But yeah.
Well, you said money too, but I didn't want to say the S word on the podcast. But okay, we
Okay.
can say it. But
Yeah.
was it being, I was curious, like, is he being strategic with and sharing that information, or was it just being pulled out because of you're pulling it out of him that that's what he's talking about?
Yeah.
Because me doing readings for people, like, I don't know what I'm gonna say. It's like dependent on the person of what gets pulled out of me. Like, there's no way to control it. There's no
Yeah.
way to be strategic about what's going to be shared. So yeah, I was wondering. So it was
Yeah.
strategically shared. He was being correct as himself to talk about sex and relationships and all that.
Yeah. Yeah. So good times. Yeah, different mind, you know, but but that was what he said. And, you know, there's just a lot of really hard lines drawn in the human design world. And I get it because if you don't follow your strategy and authority, everything else is moot. So it's like getting into the weeds about other stuff is like just so unnecessary if you're not going to hard line the main thing of like understanding what your type is and how you should be moving in the world based on that as like yourself, right? Not as your not self. Um, but yeah, I don't know how hard the lines are. Like I don't really about everything, right? It's all it's all an experiment. So yeah, is there anything that you want to add to the episode before we close up for the day?
No, but just to continue on with that like last little thought and like what I said earlier about sharing unsolicited advice and it creating success. I think it's fascinating because like here and now I have a lot of difficulty discerning the success of my signature. I feel like it is not a blue moon. I can't think of an analogy appropriate enough to describe how infrequent something actually shows up comparing to like the vast ocean of bitterness that I do think I perceive. And then looking back, because I told Sarah before at some point, like, oh, my before human design, I was like happier. I was a quote unquote happy person. And that is probably possibly ignorance. Ignorance is bliss. But I wonder how much of that happiness was actually success in disguise as living as a projector correctly without knowing it. And like now trying to be radical, trying to have strong, defined boundaries because my not self lives in gate 21 of control. So it's just how my not self operates. Like, we're going to control the process. We're going to be strategic. We're going to
Yeah.
do our strategy and authority in this particular way so that we know if we're correct or not. Hello, not self. But now seeing it and seeing the control of trying to manipulate, trying to be strategic with being strategic, having a strategy, and like what it's resulting in as an experiment. Like it's resulting in bitterness. It's resulting in not having the right people pull stuff out of me. And just like watching that and like wondering when the courage is going to come to like try to cross over some lines and see what happens. Trying to, I'm a goody two shoes. I'm innocent, as you said, good girl with innocence. It's not necessarily like being innocent, but it's like not wanting to break the rules.
Yeah.
Don't know if that's an appropriate way to
Yeah.
describe desire
Yeah.
versus innocence, but
Yeah, it is.
yeah,
It
just
is.
analyzing the thoughts.
Well, and this is where I'm like, it should be, I think, hard and fast with like the big ticket items, aka like love, housing, um, like location, jobs, work, things like that. Like you shouldn't be playing fast and loose with it. But with the smaller things, and I'm a 1-3, so I'm gonna say this, but I think with the smaller things, if you are incorrect, what you're gonna get is bitterness. And that will be what you get to tell you you're not living correctly as yourself. like I said, I would not be playing around with the bigger things, but with the smaller things, I would be experimenting, and I don't think that's just because I am a 1-3, but I do think it helps. um, so yeah, I mean, you have to experiment. That's it. This is an
Yeah.
experiment. Um, so anyway, okay, well, we just talked for a while. I feel like this was a good episode, even though we were in the Moody Judy transit of 39.5. So I'm happy with it. And happy New Year to those who acknowledge the Gregorian New Year. We're more interested, I think, at least I'm more interested in the human design New Year, the rave New Year, when the sun goes into 41.
Oh,
Mhm.
maybe when that happens, we'll talk more about 41 because I feel like I have things to share about 41 and fantasy and all that.
Yeah, I have things to
But
share too. Yeah, I'm super interested, intrigued to see, because it's not just that the sun and Pluto are entering Aquarius on the same day, and they're
that's
going
cute.
into 41. Is it?
That's my thoughts about like astrological transits. Oh, that's cute. Oh, the planets
Yeah,
are
yeah.
doing that
Well,
together. They're going hand in hand.
it's ushering Pluto into the 41, which is like an important gate because, well, we'll get into it later, but super intrigued about that transit 41 because it's also happening. Pluto will be in my on conjoin my natal Saturn on my personality side. And so that's going to be interesting to see how that all works out. So, and Laura with fantasy, I'm sure you're going to have quite a few things to say. Um,
Well, it's more of just like thoughts about romance novels and like
well, yeah, no,
that
but
being my current focus. Yeah.
that's what I figured. Um,
I have
that's,
nothing else to talk about.
I know. Well, I mean, you've got plenty. Trust me. With you have the 1648, and your focused perspective and gate 9, as your son. Yeah, you've got plenty to talk about. Yours is just more kind of specific, whereas mine is more broad, which makes, I think, for a good listening experience. So, anyway, if you stuck around for the whole episode, thank you for being here. We will be back when we're back. And like I said, if you acknowledge this new year, I hope you are having a good start to January.
Stay tuned for more. Follow, like, subscribe, do all the muggle things. Thanks for being here and listening.
Bye.